My name is Magda, M-A-G-D-A, Berkman, B-E-R-K-M-A-N.
And what was your name at birth?
Mermelstein, M-E-R-M-E-L-S-T-E-I-N.
My mother was always talked about her experiences. It was always there. You don't go through something like that and just go on and live, a normal life. I think that was always with her.
When I think about my grandmother, the first thing that I do think about is of her survival.
My mother was the oldest of 5 children, and she was born in a town that was, the name of the town was Bilka. It was in Czechoslovakia.
I have a lot of memories of her. Most are just probably charming, silly little memories that, like most people would remember of their grandparents. I remember times thinking that she was kind of goofy for one reason or another, but then I think when you think back with adult eyes and you recognize what she had lived through, those things that maybe would have been goofy or silly kind of seem a little more serious.
I used to run around in the store. I was just a little girl that could hardly see me, and I was walking with a curly hair, and everybody, I was just the wonder of wonders. I was singing and doing all kinds of things when I was very young.
I was in 9th grade. We read the book Night, and the teacher had asked the class, anybody in here have a parent that was in the Holocaust? And in my community, that was not an unusual question to be asked. And in my class, I want to say probably 4 or 5 of us raised our hands. And then she said, how many of you think your parents might be willing to come in and talk to the class? And I was the only one with my hand still up.
That's how everybody in town knew me. I was famous.
How the Holocaust started, not to completely generalize, but at the root of it, it started with hate. And it is a hundreds and hundreds of year-long hatred that we define as anti-Semitism.
What were your personal experiences with anti-Semitism when you were a child?
Well, since I sort of grew up with it, it really didn't surprise me a lot. But it became worse, and of course it was starting to hurt because we started to fear for our lives.
So Bilki is a special example of a territory that was occupied by multiple parties. So for example, the war didn't start until September 1939 when Germany invaded Poland. However, technically, things started in Czechoslovakia, where Bilki was originally located, earlier in 1938 when the Sudetenland was annexed by Germany.
Bilka population was about 10,000. It was a big village, and most of them, except for about 1,000, 1,000 were Jewish, and the rest of them were Russians, some Czechs, and some Hungarians.
Eventually, Bilki then becomes occupied or part of Hungary. And for a time, Bilki was relatively safe, and what I mean by that is deportations were not occurring in 38, 39, 40 of Jewish individuals. However, the propaganda, the hatred, the stripping of civil rights, that did almost immediately begin, just like it had begun as a process in Germany, also enacted in Hungary. And eventually in 1944 is really when the deportations of Hungarian Jews begin.
What they do in Europe is you take a test, and the test you take determines what high school you go to. They call them gymnasiums.
And I had family in Budapest, actually Újpest, a suburb of Budapest. And I was going there to study for preparation to go to the gymnasium, which was like a college.
And while she was visiting her aunt, the Germans came into her village, Bilka, and her parents, her 4 younger siblings, Her grandparents, basically her whole family, had been rounded up and taken to the concentration camp while she was gone.
I remember my aunt was going with me to take me, so I shouldn't be on the train by myself. My mother also accompanied me to the station. I remember her hugging me and crying. And as I was on the train, she waved to me. And I really had the feeling that I'd never see her again. And I never did.
At the time, Hungary had a ruler that protected the Jewish citizens of Hungary, and so she, was able to stay there. But eventually, the Germans came through Hungary also, and she was taken to Auschwitz.
Over 400,000 Jews were murdered in Auschwitz between May and July of 1944, so this was a very swift action. Also in the East were mobile killing units, and the mobile killing units are also called the Einsatzgruppe. These were almost militia and sometimes even volunteers who arrived to a village or a Jewish village or a shtetl and rounded up entire Jewish communities and took them out into a clearing or into the woods and murdered them en masse, quite literally bullet by bullet.
They told us that they were taking us someplace else. They didn't say where. They took us to the railroad station and put us in those freight trains. So many people squashed in, just like a bunch of animals. They made us go out of the freight train. They did not allow us to take our belongings, just what we had on. And they told us to form a line. And I remember my aunt and that other woman being in front of us. They went to the left, which was, I think the left was the crematorium and the right was, I remember I went to the right. That I remember, so it had to be that way. They took us into a bathhouse where they stripped us of all of our clothes. They shaved our heads, and when we came out of the bath, we were given clothes, not ours, somebody else's, that didn't fit. After that bath, which I later found out that that's the same bath, the crematoria, only when you go in, they either give you water or gas. We got water.
It's a really brutal and difficult chapter of the history to learn about and to grapple with. A lot of communities were completely decimated.
When I think about her and her survival, it makes me think that my mother, and then by extension me and my children, that we all exist by the skin of our teeth.
She was fairly fortunate in that it was towards the end of the war, so she did not end up with one of the tattoos. Most of her family, her parents, her grandparents, her siblings were all killed.
After a while, I could see the smoke coming out of the chimneys, and nobody had to tell me what happened.
She did have an aunt that survived.
We stayed long enough to see that there weren't any more people coming back. Our neighbors were not as good to us, and the home that we loved was not a home to us anymore.
They knew that they did not want to stay in Europe anymore, and she wanted to come to the United States. Her one aunt was her mother's sister, and they had two brothers that had gotten out before the Germans came through, and they were living in Cleveland. They wanted to come to the United States, but so did everybody else. So it was very difficult to be able to get passage quickly. You couldn't just get on an airplane and come stay with your family. First they went to Paris, and she lived in Paris for a couple years. After that was England. She lived in Southampton for about 6 months, and then Canada was another stop along the way. When she thought of the United States, she thought that she would come here and find the roads paved in gold. I mean, that was her impression of how much better her life would be here.
I had made up my mind while, I was here that I wanted to get Americanized. And I went through so much. And instead of sticking with my own people, I had joined like the B'nai B'rith, a young B'nai B'rith group, and met a lot of friends.
She was denied her parents, from the time she was about 14, 15 when she went to Hungary. She was denied having the experience of having her parents raising her. It affected her parenting skills.
I can remember being somewhere like at a store, and if I would go over the next aisle looking at something, she would get really nervous about where I was. And I do remember as a kid thinking that was kind of strange. It was definitely a stronger reaction than like my mom or dad would have had. And I don't know that I thought a whole lot of it at the time, but when I think about it through adult eyes, I recognize that she probably lived a majority of her life in terror. And so I think that shaped a lot of how she treated people that she loved.
There was just a part of her that always had a degree of unhappiness.
And I wanted them to have a remembrance and perhaps to know why, as a mother, when they were growing up, they didn't feel my love as much as they should have. It was there, but they may not have felt it.
So when there is someone who feels comfortable and safely willing to share their story, we connect to that as human beings because we recognize emotions of sadness and fear or dread or even loss, right? So the Holocaust speaks to us on a human level.
Back in the 1990s, Steven Spielberg became concerned that the Holocaust survivors were beginning to die off, that they were getting older, and he wanted to document their stories.
The USC Shoah Foundation is a really incredible organization that was started to film as many Holocaust survivors that were willing to share their stories.
My mother became involved with that and was accepted to have her story be told.
Today is October 2nd, 1996. My name is Carol Colbert, and I will be interviewing Magda Berkman.
It was kind of hard to be part of that, but I, like I said, always felt that it was important that everybody know the story. So both as a daughter of a survivor and as a parent, I was happy that my family was able to participate.
It was pretty remarkable. So I remember being in high school, and I remember taking part in the interview process.
These people are very close to my heart. Start with this little one.
And I remember that we were asked some questions, and I was proud to speak about just my opinions of her.
That experience is something that's really extraordinary.
I have a cousin from my mother's father's side of the family that had found me, and that's actually a pretty common thing in the families of Holocaust survivors, where you hear from long-lost family members that you didn't know you even had. So she had invited me to come visit her in Sweden. And there was a Holocaust museum. I went and I typed in my mother's name, and all the way in Stockholm, there was her story. It certainly was important to me that that my children understood what it was like to be Jewish, and that their children understood.
I certainly think she meant enough to me for me to name my daughter after her, my daughter Maggie. is named for my grandmother, whose full name was Magdalena. Her story has impacted the way that I raised my family because, quite simply, I feel an obligation to make sure that it doesn't end with me. It was really important to me to raise my children Jewish, even in a community where there would be few people that were like them. It's really important to me to not hide my Judaism, and for my children to not hide their Judaism. And it's really important to me that whenever it makes sense to do so, to share what happened to her.
It's kind of a scary, crazy world we live in sometimes, and sometimes you hear people deny that the Holocaust even happened. And of course, I know that it did from personal experience. And so I think her legacy is that future generations are going to know a firsthand account of what the experience was like, and a firsthand account of what hate can do. I mean, it was hate, and it was scapegoating that led to everything. And what a crazy mind it would take to put something like that together. A degree of evil that I hope the world never sees again. So I'm very grateful that my mother wanted to tell her story, and that her story is out there for others to learn from.